Okay, great. So we'll sort of pick up where we left off. Last week we talked about sort of the things you need to sort of bring to kind of go through the onboarding phase, right? The setup of an account. Does anybody have any questions about any of this? What the requirements are in terms of things you need to start with to spin up an Azure environment?
Curtis,
No?
did you have anything in regards to the one for us?
I have not yet. I haven't had a chance to sit down and continue working on that since we played with it last week with the 2 test users. I've been working on stuff for Medina.
Okay, so actually that's a good point, Lydia. So I hate using Lydia as an example, but she's got the 2 active things going on right now with me, so it's kind of fresh in my head. So
Yeah, go on a user.
Yeah, Lydia's actually moving her own HCS environment into Azure, and one of the questions I asked was, do you plan on sort of creating a brand new domain controller from scratch in Azure, or do you want to bring an existing bring your existing domain controller and move it up into Azure, right? So she said that she wanted to bring and retain her existing users into Azure, so that's the route we were kind of going down into. So again, let's just do a quick recap of what we went through last week. So you have a customer looking to go Azure, right? Looking to go WVD. You need to have obviously a subscription ready from your CSP distributor. You have to have your Microsoft 365 licensing available, and you have to have Nerdio set up, right? So again, there's 2 versions of Nerdio. There's a version of Nerdio called Nerdio for Azure, which is a simple, very simple Nerdio interface that gives you none of the flexibility that you might be looking for. And then we have Nerdio Manager for MSP, which is a newer product that gives you the flexibility, but also means that you need to know a thing or two about Azure, or not really about Azure, but really need to know how like a domain controller works, how AD Connect works, before you get started with this product. But let's assume that you kind of understand how all that stuff works on premise. We're going to basically go and add an account, and the first step is to connect to the customer's Azure AD tenant, right? Or in this case, yourself, Lydia. So you log in as yourself using your global admin. You select the setup type using your existing Active Directory. The second step is you specify the VNet and the subnet that you have in Azure. So most people actually don't have that set up if you've never touched Azure before. So I'll kind of show you in Azure how to kind of manually deploy those things, right? And then we'll kind of step through section 3 and then section 4. Is anybody here sort of set up a VNet in Azure before manually?
I have.
Okay. And I'm not asking Jonathan because Jonathan I know knows. But basically, you're going to log into the Azure portal. And let's see what tenant I'm logged into. I can't use this one.
I don't see your screen either. Am I doing something?
Oh, I'm sorry. Maybe I didn't share it.
Yeah, I was about to ask the same thing.
Oh, I'm sorry. You see it now?
Yes.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I got it.
Okay, so I was kind of going through this before, right? The ability to, when you're adding a new account in Nerdio, you basically click add account, you connect to your customer's tenant. It's going to ask you what subscription you're going to use and then what type of Active Directory you're going to use, right? So you have using a new ADDS, you can use existing ADDS, or you can use your existing domain controller. So I think most people here are going to use your existing domain controller. And once you select that, the next step is to go and specify a VNet for us to basically tap into. So what I'm going to show you now is actually how to deploy a new VNet. Okay, so I have a new, let's say I'm logging in for the first time to this Azure portal. You're going to go and search virtual network and click on new, and pick the subscription you're going to use, pick the resource group. I'm going to use this fake one here, and I'm going to say VNet 2. Right, and you can name this whatever you want, but this is just like, think of this as like your virtual switch or something, right? So the next step, you're going to specify your IP addresses. By default, Microsoft is going to give you the 10.0.0/16 address, which is a really large address space, and they're going to also give you by default the 10.0.0.0/24, which is your normal, 256 or 255 addresses address space. Now, this should be fine as long as your on-prem network doesn't conflict, right? So here, again, we're talking about flexibility here. You're going to be able to pick everything you want to be able to use this product for. So a lot of people sort of get nervous here, not really knowing what address spaces and subnets mean. But again, if your on-prem network is a 192.168, you can kind of leave it as a default. I would only change this if you're intentionally making changes to your subnet or picking a different subnet because it overlaps. So Lydia asks, so that can be changed. You don't have to use the default. That is correct. Yeah, you can change it, but a lot of people don't really change it because it doesn't conflict. So they just use what's already there. And you can kind of dig into this stuff if you want, but you can easily also click review and create to create your network, right? And it takes a couple of seconds to create a new VNet, and that's basically what we're going to use to hook into your networking area. So step three kind of looks like this. It's going to ask you what your existing domain controller domain name is with username and password. So that's stuff that you use every day. That's the same domain controller username and password that you have on premise. The last thing we're going to ask you is, where do you want these WVD session hosts to join to from an OU group standpoint, right? If you're going to deploy Windows Virtual Desktop inside your own domain controller, do you want to put it inside a specific OU group? Now, if you leave it blank, we'll just put it in the normal computer objects group, which means it'll adhere to any existing GPO policies you have pointing to your computer group. Or, what I recommend is go and create a new OU group and specify the distinguished name here. So Nerdio deploys and provisions servers inside that new OU group so it can adhere to specific WVD group policies if you choose to use those. Any questions? Hey, Danny, I see you here again. I don't want to go too fast, but I also don't want to go too slow. So I need your feedback. Is everybody sort of understand what we're doing here?
Got a pretty good idea on it.
Okay. Okay, Brian says good. Okay, great. So you're going to specify that, and then the next question we're going to ask is, I can't really show you this because I don't. Maybe I can type some stuff in. Fake domain local and then add fake domain local blah 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 blah. I'll leave it blank for now. So the next step is going to ask me, for the user profiles, right? What type of storage location do I want? Right. So in the old Nerdio for Azure product, we only gave you the ability to deploy a file server because, again, if we're looking for simplicity, there's nothing to think about. We just do it every single time the same way. Here, you have the option to deploy your own Azure files, or if you have a file server already in Azure you want us to use for your profiles, you can specify the UNC path here. So let's just say we're going to use an existing profile, path, and then we're going to click save and done. So when we click save and done, it's going to take like a couple more seconds, but it's going to show up like this, and you're going to be able to click manage to start managing this customer, right? So when I click on manage, this is basically what I see right now. So I can go home, which is the dashboard of like this account. I can go to users, which is a view into this environment's AD users page. All right, so I'm now logged into in customer's environment. I can see which desktops these users are assigned to. If it's blank, that means they're not being assigned any desktops or remote apps. I can see what groups they're a part of, and then I can have my help desk guys log into this environment and do a lot of the help desk functionality that they're normally used to doing. So if somebody calls in and says you need a password reset, you could just reset the password here, and it'll kick off AD sync and basically sync up all your passwords. So this is user management. You have group management. So you have your you can assign groups to WVD as opposed to individual users now, which is very neat. But any changes to members of groups that are synced to on-prem AD needs to be done on the domain controller. Okay. And then this is where your WVD session host lives. So we have a tab called WVD now, and you can click on host pools, which is a list of all your WVD host pools. Okay, so I'll start quizzing people now. Curtis, what is a host pool? I guess what's like a good way to describe it? You don't have to know exactly what it is, but
That's where you've got all of your images for where your remote users are going to log into and where their desktops and files are housed.
yeah, so sort of yes. So it's basically a logical container for where your actual session hosts run, right? So your session host is what the actual end users log into. The level above that is the host pool, and then the level above host pool is called the workspace. You don't really need to be concerned about the workspace, but the idea of knowing what a host pool is and maybe segregating it based off of you know, departments or different locations in an organization is important to kind of distinguish. So here we have a couple of different host pools as examples. Maybe we have accounting department, we have bookkeepers, we have executives, we have some other test host pools. But if you look inside one of these host pools, you'll see that inside of that hierarchy, you have different session hosts. And these session hosts, one of them is on, two of them are off. But these session hosts are basically ready to accept users when they log in. All right, and each one of these session hosts are individual VMs that I can basically power off, restart. I can re-image them, I can deactivate them, I can delete them. Right. So restarting just obviously means restart. Re-image means I can take this existing machine and re-image it using the golden image. I can deactivate something. Deactivating is terminology in Azure for like putting something into drain mode. When you put something into drain mode, it tells the WVD broker not to let anybody new inside that host. But anybody who's existing inside that host and who's already using it can stay there for as long as they want. So it doesn't mean you're turning off the machine. You're just deactivating it from
And
new
billing
users logging
stops, right? At that point, you don't, the billing
No.
from Microsoft no, it still continues. Okay.
in. Yeah. So deallocated means billing stops, right? So if you, I think if I
Right,
hover
that's
over this
right.
icon, yeah, deallocated is billing stops. Now, so and a lot of people actually, including myself, and we made the mistake in the past, right? Basically, if you go into a VM in Azure and you actually press start and then shut down, that actually does not deallocate the machine because the VM basically is still on, but the operating system is shut off. Means your customer can't use the environment, but technically, if you go to the Azure, the VMs are still running. So that's a tricky thing because you think it's off, you think you're not being billed, but Azure's still billing you. You have to go to the Azure portal or go here and actually power off or deallocate the machine.
So power off is deallocate in this portal?
In Nerdo, yes, yeah.
Oh, okay,
We
perfect.
try to not make it confusing, but I remember when I first started playing with Azure, I definitely got a surprise bill because I thought shutting it down meant deallocating, which it doesn't. But in Nerdio's case, it does because, you know, for us it makes sense, right, to IT people. But okay, so let's go back up to the host pool level. So in the host pool level, you can see what the name of the host pool is, what, you know, the friendly name, what resource group the host pool is in, what type of desktop experience the host pool is able to basically give somebody. So this is a multi-user desktop pool with remote apps. So what does that mean? That means if I log into, that means this pool or this particular session host is able to be logged in as a full virtual desktop, or I could use that same host pool to publish remote apps. So let's talk about what remote apps are and then what session host pools are. So here I have my remote desktop client. I have my remote apps. So remote apps are basically the same applications you're running inside of a session host, but not showing you the full desktop experience. So if let me see if this works. Sorry, if I open up Firefox, and I don't know if this session host is actually on, so I don't know if it's going to work. I should just kill this because I think. So let's open up Firefox. You can kind of see the details. If I show details, you'll see that I'm actually logging into a real Windows 10 computer in the background. but the end user probably won't know or care, right? And if I publish a remote app, it just, it has to log in through its normal Windows login process. But at the end, it just shows you the Firefox screen, right? So this is Firefox. It looks like it's running locally on my machine. I can minimize it. I can do all those things that it wants me to do like a normal application, but it's really running in Azure, right? So if I do a speed test, and God knows I don't have a 1 gig connection at my house, but I can do that in Azure, right? Because I'm really just doing a speed test from inside of a application published to my desktop that's really running in Azure. So what you can do is use this technique and manage a lot of your QuickBooks, right? And your Timberlines and your any type of application that gets installed inside of a session host can be published as a remote app. So maybe you have a customer that isn't ready to go full-fledged virtual desktop because maybe you just bought them new computers last year, but they have a line of business application that needs to move to Azure. You can use remote apps as a way to kind of publish out the application. Right? So you don't have to give somebody the full desktop experience if you don't want to. The remote app is a really good way to kind of bridge the gap between having no virtual desktop and having a full virtual desktop. So once I add a new host pool, I basically get, this is the process of adding a new host pool. This is the decision I have to make. So once you actually applied Nerdio on top of this environment, you could pretty much come to WVD, and you're going to do basically two things at first. You're going to create a new desktop image. So a desktop image is the perfect image that all your host pools are going to basically derive off of, right? So I can add an Azure image from the Azure library. So let's say I want to call this tag demo image. And I want to put this image inside of this subnet. And I want to use a image that's the latest 20H2 with the Pro Plus, right? And I'm going to pick what VM size I want the image to be configured as. So the VM size here doesn't really matter. All you're using this VM size for is when you're actually turning on the image to do any edits. This is the VM size it's going to be. So I'll leave it as a D2 SV3. And I'll also specify a local username and password for the image. So I also won't turn it to the DD, right? Press OK. And what it's going to do is basically Nerdy's going to go and grab the latest Windows 10 image from the Azure Marketplace and make it an image here. The second thing I'm going to do is go to the host pool and go add a new host pool. So if I'm adding a new host pool, we can call it, again, tag demo. Demo for tag webinar. And we can give it what, the experience type I want to deliver, right? So you can do multi-user desktop, which is Lydia, what we transitioned to. You can do multi-user remote app, or you could do a combination of both. Or you can do single-user desktops, which are pooled, or single-user desktops that are personal. So single-user desktop that's personal is basically one user assigned to a specific VM, right? They're not sharing a VM or desktop or anything like that. And then single-user desktop pooled is basically a pool of single-user session hosts, and depending on who logs in first, they'll get automatically assigned to a machine till they log off. So there's different reasons why you would use these for different scenarios.
Hey, Tony, I got a quick question for you.
Sure.
You had mentioned that you could do a combination of multi-user remote app or multi-user desktop. How do you set that up, or do you have to set it up individually, go through this whole setup process multiple times?
No, so you just basically, like, if you're wanting to do multi-user desktop and remote app, right, at the same time, you could just pick either one of these to start with.
Okay.
Right. So it's I'll come back to that question because I have
Okay.
one that's kind of set up that way. So you're going to kind of make a decision on what desktop experience to give it. Name prefix is basically the computer name of the session host that gets created. So I'll call it tag. And again, I'll put it in the same network subnet. I'll base it off of maybe the bookkeeper's existing image. I already have an image called bookkeeper, so I'm going to use that image. And maybe that bookkeeper's image already has Lacert installed and QuickBooks and whatever else the customer might have. This is the session host size, right? So maybe I want to pick like a, D8 ASV4 or something like that. And then I want to quickly assign a group of users. So I can use a group, an AD group that's synced up from Azure's security groups, or I can assign a specific person. So for now, I'm just gonna, who's in this AD environment? I don't know. I'm just gonna pick something here. I don't know what these are. All right, I'm gonna assign the group of users that's gonna have access to WVD. You press OK, and Nerdy is gonna go and create the host pool. So you can see on the bottom here in green, this is creating host pool in progress. And once the host pool is created, the next screen that's gonna load up is the screen where you get to configure your auto scaling. Okay, so after I've added my host pool, my screen refreshes and I'm showing my auto scaling settings. Now, you don't have to use auto scaling. Auto scaling, you know, is a bonus or an added plus, because in an environment that's larger than, let's say, 15 people, it's wise to use auto scaling, right? Because in an environment with more than 15 people, likely you're going to have more than one session host. And when you have more than one session host, the idea is that you're not going to have all your session hosts on 24/7 when you know during the middle of the night nobody's going to really use the second session host or even the first one. So what we can do is actually turn them completely off, and then maybe you know the customer starts logging in at 5 a.m. in the morning, turn the first one on at 5 a.m. and then maybe turn the second one on at 8 a.m. Right? You can kind of time things like that, but having those machines off during those nighttime hours is going to reduce your consumption by a heck of a lot, right? And let me just take a quick detour and show you like what I mean by that and why why the concept of scaling up and down is such a big important thing to think about. So let's pick a region. Let's pick a VM as an example. Let's go for the 8-core 32 gig RAM machine. This is the Azure calculator. Anybody can go to this if you want to play around with numbers. But an 8-core 32 gig RAM machine, Microsoft tells me it's 75 cents per hour to run this machine per hour, right? So remember, you're renting this from Microsoft. Every hour you have it on, it's 75 cents per hour. Now, if you run this 24/7 for an entire year, entire month, it's about 730 hours in an entire month, right? You got some months that have shorter days, some months that have longer days, but your average is about 730. So you run at 730 hours in a month and 75 cents per hour, you're looking at about $548 per month for an 8-core 32 gig RAM machine. An 8-core 32 gig RAM machine, you can probably happily run about 8 people's desktop on that machine, right? So if you think about an average person's work hour, the average work hour is probably 40 hours a week. So let's just overestimate, let's say 50 hours a week per average employee, and you got 4 weeks in a month. You're looking at about 200 hours of usage. So if I could take this machine, instead of running it 24 hours a day, which would result me in the price this much, I can actually say, hey, what if I ran this machine for 200 hours and take advantage of Azure Hybrid benefits because it's a Windows 10 box? I can actually get the same machine for $76 per month. So if you have 8 people running 24, you have 8 people running a 9-to-5 shop on $76 a month. That's really good, right? Because if I take $76 a month and divide it by 8 people, and then divide it between 20 working days, it only costs me 47 cents per day, basically, to run that customer's WVD environment. Right. So if you think about it that way, the goal here is to reduce the amount of machines you don't need, and the machines that you do need 24/7, which are your domain controllers, your app servers, the things that need to stay on, you want to take advantage of the 3-year reservation. Right. So if you're going to have a machine run 24/7, which is basically 730 hours in a month, right, you can either pay this or you can pay this, right, which is a lot cheaper. So I'm just kind of showing you sort of the economics of Azure and why we keep talking about auto scaling, because auto scaling is really the key in how to really optimize your Azure environment, and also the key to an MSP really pocketing the savings, right? Because that's really what you want to do. You want to figure out what your costs are going to be, mark it up a healthy amount, go sell to your client for some flat rate, and then turn around and do everything you possibly can to lower your own cost. So whatever the difference is between that and what you sold it for is your margin. And most MSP margins are somewhere around 40 to 80% margin, markup margin. Okay, so any questions about any of the pricing stuff? Okay, so come back here. So auto scaling is how we configure that optimization, right? So up top is basically my pool settings. Again, I'm creating a pool. Pool is just a container for multiple session hosts in a pool. And keep in mind, I'm talking about session hosts a lot, and I'm not really talking about servers because servers is not a difficult concept to understand. It's just a VM running 24/7. You can do simple things like start, stop, add a VM, resize, all those things. But WVD, the theme of WVD is session hosts and user desktops. That's why we're spending the time here, because I think this area is the area that confuses people more than anything else. So we'll go back to the properties of the pool. So step one, we're going to basically specify to the auto scaling engine, right? So Nerdio has an auto scaling algorithm that basically is running all the time. It basically checks your host pool to see if the session hosts inside the host pool are adhering to the policy that you've assigned. So here's the policy that you're assigning, basically. So step one, we're going to basically define how a host pool is shown as active inside of Azure. So I would just leave this alone. WVD agent available is perfect. The way that this kind of works in the background, so inside of each Windows 10 box, how does Microsoft know that the box is active, basically? There's a little tiny WVD agent that gets installed on the Windows 10 multi-session machine that reports back to the WVD broker on its status, right? So you're basically determining a machine is online and active if the status of the WVD agent shows good to go, right? And if it's not showing good to go, then it's telling the WVD broker not to let anybody into that machine because that machine maybe is not ready or has a problem. So base host capacity just means how many machines do you want on standby. So remember that example I showed you with the accounting pool, it had 3 machines, 1 of them are on and 2 of them are off. That's because I have a base host capacity of 3 in that setting. So 3 means 3 machines are already provisioned, deployed from the golden image, but just turned off, meaning they're not consuming any compute costs, but they are still consuming any disk cost because the machine, even though it's allocated, deallocated and it's off, it's still using a C drive that's typically that's being reserved for that machine, right? So even though a machine is deallocated, if the machine exists, it's likely using a disk that is in reserve, that's reserved for that machine, which means you're paying for that. Okay. Now, minimum active host is how many machines you want in that particular pool to be on all the time. So in an environment where you're not 100% sure if a customer is going to turn on the computer at 10 at night to start using their environment or 2 in the morning to start using their environment, you want to have at least 1 active host running. So it doesn't matter what time of day they log in. There's actually 1 host that's available and ready to go at any time. Right, and then burst beyond base capacity is how many machines you want above that number to burst out into. So in that pool environment, that accounting demo had 3 machines, right? I started with 1 machine that's always on. If the 1 machine fills up, it's going to go and turn on the second machine. And because the machines are already there on standby, turning it on takes less than a minute for this WVD agent to check in to start loading more people onto it. Now, let's say you max out at 3 machines. 3 machines are all on. Each machine has like 8 people in it, and there's like another 5 users that magically you didn't anticipate that logs in right after the 3 machines are full. Now, this number here determines how many more machines you can burst into. So if I only have this number at 1, then the maximum this pool I could burst up to is 4 total machines, right? So if
What does the user experience look like when that happens?
it's unbeknownst to them, they don't know that's happening, which is the beauty of
So
this.
it actually lets them log in, and then all this is just happening on the back end.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, the customer doesn't know, right? But you wanna basically think about that real hard, right? Because if you had this at, let's say, 1, and you have a customer at 30 something people, and they all log on at 8 in the morning, well, that 1 machine is going to fill it really, really fast. If that machine's only set to handle it, let's say 8 people, the other users are going to, if you don't have another machine available, it's going to start packing that 1 machine and not, basically the machine's going to get bogged down with too many people on 1 host. So you want to at least set this up and anticipate how your users are going to use the environment, when they're going to log on, when they're going to log off, knowing that type of scheduling active, like that, oh, what do I call it? knowing how they work and when they work is very important with VDI environments, because you want to anticipate when they burst, right? So there's a couple of ways to kind of address that. You can increase the size of this base capacity, which means there's machines that are already always ready for them to log on to. And again, it takes less than a minute for this machine to turn on, check in, and make available. Or you can set pre-staging hosts. So in step 3, I know I skipped step 2, but I can say Monday through Friday by, let's say, 7 a.m. or whatever the time you want it to be, have all 5 machines on and ready, right? So if I do that, then I have 5 machines capable of handling 8 people per machine. I can have a huge influx of users all at 8 o'clock in the morning and not have any issues. They'll just nicely load balance between all 5 machines. All right, so there's 2 ways of handling that. You can handle it reactively by just giving it the amount of base capacity machine that it can do, or you can handle it proactively by already deploying all 5 machines up and running by a certain amount of time.
Do they then scale back after all that activity?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
So after the activity, so this is scaling logic. Scaling logic says, what are the triggers you want Nerdio to basically look at to scale in and scale out? So number 1 is there's different options. The first one is CPU usage. Is a start or create one machine. So right now you have one machine active. It's a start one, so it's going to start one of the ones that are currently turned off. If the CPU usage across all hosts exceeds 65%. So basically, if the first machine, let's say 7 o'clock in the morning, people start logging in. If the first machine exceeds 65% CPU utilization for over 5 minutes, it's going to go and add a second machine. So turn one of these guys on. Right now you have 2 machines. Now people are starting to load balance between 2 machines. Now both machines, right, all hosts exceed 65% again for over 5 minutes. It's going to spin up a third one, a fourth one, and a fifth one, all the way to its max burst capacity, which is in this case 6, right? And then I can remove one if the CPU usage across all hosts drop below 40%. So 40% or less CPU usage across all 6 machines. Let's say we're getting towards 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. See, people are leaving their desks, logging off maybe. You're seeing CPU drop on average across all 6 hosts. It's going to say, look for a session host that I can scale in, right? So I can maybe restrict scale in till 5 p.m. So I don't want any session host being removed except for the hours of 5 p.m. to 12 a.m., right? Except the nighttime hours. So during these hours, I can say, if CPU utilization drop below 40%, start removing a session host. Now, how does it do it? It's going to look for a session host that obviously has nobody logged on, remove that, no problem. Then it's going to look at the session host that has the least amount of people logged in, and then send a message out to those users 10 minutes before the session host starts to scale back in, telling them, hey, your company policy says 5 o'clock, I'm going to start scaling these machines back in. Please save your work and log off, right? Or log back on if you want to keep working. Now, you don't want to disturb them, right? Most SMB customers won't tolerate that. This is more of an enterprise way of thinking, where customer service, call center leaves at 5 o'clock, everybody clocks out, new shift starts at 6, whatever the case may be. But small business customers don't work that way. So what you're going to want to do is actually set your aggressiveness to medium. And medium aggressiveness basically says, even though it's 5 p.m. and I'm scheduled to scale back in because all my metrics check for me, because you're still using it and you're still active in the machine, we'll wait for you until you log off or become disconnected. All right, so this is sort of the setting I would go with if you're dealing with customers like, the ones we manage on this call, right? Medium aggressiveness. So somebody could be using their machine past 5 p.m. all the way to 6 or 7 p.m. And that particular machine that person's on will not scale in until they log off. So you're not going to walk into a situation where, a customer says, hey, I was in the middle of my work and it automatically kicked me out, right? It won't do that. So that's one way to kind of, basically determine when to scale in and out. The other way is average active sessions. So this one says start one or create one if the average active sessions across all hosts exceed a certain number. So if you know that, let's say, a D8 ASV4 can hold 8 people very, very nicely, maybe you want, by the time it hits 7 people, to automatically scale the machine out and make 8 more available slots, right? And maybe I want to do the opposite, right? Maybe if the average active sessions, maybe it's towards the end of the day, I have 6 machines that are D8 ASV4s. If the average across all session hosts drop below this magic number of 4, then start looking for a session host to scale back in. So it dynamically basically scales in and out depending on how you want the algorithm to behave. And then lastly, we have available sessions. So maybe you can set the max available sessions per host at 8 sessions per host. Based on this number, I can fit about 48 people into this up to 6 hosts based on 8 sessions per host. And if you want Nerdio to maintain at all times a minimum of 5 available slots, we'll go and create new session hosts or destroy them to give you a minimum of 5 available slots. Okay, so anybody sort of have any questions about these algorithms and how they work? But they're designed to dynamically give you exactly the amount of session hosts your customer needs at that given time, no more, no less. And the goal of it, of course, is to give you as little session hosts as possible, turning them on as minimal of a time as possible to save you costs. Any questions? Kyle, anything?
Yeah, I'm thinking about it. The question I have is when you're scaling up, say you got 3 sessions, you had 4 sessions, you had 5 sessions, eventually it brings on another host. Do you, at that moment in time, do you have 5 on one and nobody on the new one? Or does it actually dynamically spread the load? And then conversely, it does the same thing when it scales down, doesn't it? I mean, if you're scaling down and you said, hey, we get down below 4, but you actually have 3 on each machine, does it pull them together transparent to the people using?
No. So that's so you're thinking more of like VMware vMotion, where like things can fluidly switch between one session. No, that's not there yet. That's why we're very careful about when we scale in. And even like, for example, if you have a session that has only one person on it, that session host will not destroy itself until the last person logs off. So it won't dynamically. Now there is an algorithm that you can actually set up. I'll show you where it is. There's something called breadth first load balancing and depth first load balancing. So if you have 2 machines, let's say with the 8 slots in each machine, depth first load balancing means WVD will put everybody and fill up that first host before it fills up anybody in the second host, which is probably not the best way to load balance, because here you have a machine that's capable of having 8 more people, but I'm busy filling up this machine for 8 people before I even start with the second one, right? And then you have depth first load balancing, which says I have 2 available machines. Let me try to equally divvy up the amount of people and divide them against the 2. But when I'm scaling back in, it's not going to move the people on the second host back into the first one. It actually will just leave the second one on completely until everybody logs off. So best practices in a VDI environment is actually to enforce GPO policies for disconnect and log off. I know that's a topic that's controversial in the SMB space, because you don't want to do that to them, right? But in large scale environments, that is a very common thing, because if you don't touch your environment for, let's say, an hour, it'll automatically disconnect you. If you don't touch your environment after you get disconnected or log back in, it'll actually log you off. And the end users know this and expect this. So they know not to not save things, or they make sure that they're aware that this is happening, right? You don't want to enforce this upon people that don't understand this is happening and why you're doing it, right? So you can kind of say, hey, Mr. Customer, I can put you into Azure and let everything run 24/7 and not worry about this, and you'll pay this price, or I could save you, 40, 60% if you let me do this, right? So depending on who you talk to, if they're price conscious, they'll probably say yes. The end users will deal with it, but they'll learn. And then you have customers that will say, no, I'll never accept that, right?
Yeah, I've got a client that I'd like to be able to force users to log off once a week or once a day on.
You're right. And sometimes people don't reboot machine. And those are bad practices for an MSP, because when you patch a machine, the machine needs to reboot, the same thing happens, right? It's not like this is sort of very foreign to them, but when you're dealing with VDIs, it's ideal to have it automatically log off. Now, you're the type of company that say I can't enforce it, the customer wants what they want, then don't use auto scaling. Have these machines running 24/7 and just reserve them. You still get the 80% off. Yep.
So you keep discussing when you hit 8 VDIs in that particular session before another one opens. Mm-hmm. You're choosing that number based on the configuration that you did of the host pool itself, or is that a generic best recommended quantity to run on each unit?
Great question. I'm picking that based on the machine I size for them. So if you size like a E16, which I believe I had you do for Masters Electric, that one ideally can have 16 people on it before it scales out.
Okay, so there is an intentional sizing in regards to that then
Yes.
correlates to the number of ones that you would want to run in it. And if you're realizing that along the way that you need more, then it's easy enough to just change
Yeah,
the
resize it.
size and
Yes.
go from there.
Yeah.
But going
Yeah.
down is more difficult, yes?
Well, if you have multiple users now in your Masters Electric situation, I forget what we picked, but they only have like, what is it, 20 people or something like that?
20 people,
Less?
yeah.
How many?
20.
20? Yeah. So whatever machine we picked, that machine likely will, because there's only one session host that client requires. That machine, we're probably not going to auto scale. We're going to leave it on 24/7 and have that. You only auto scale when you have a need for more than one session host.
Ah, there's the key.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
more
If
than
you-
one session host, then the auto scaling becomes critical. That's what I
Yes.
needed.
Yeah.
The litmus. Thank you.
And then
Trevor-
Tony,
Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Danny, on the VM size that you've got there, that E16, you're basically allowing one core per user at the max,
Yes.
the maximum number of users. Okay.
Right. And there's
So
different
if we-
ratios they can use.
So if we had an 8-core processor there, we'd be 8 users.
At most, I would put on there, right? If they're
Okay.
like your normal heavy users, right? If you have a customer that doesn't use email, doesn't use browsers, just use it. Now, that's why I say when you're running a remote app, you typically can fit more than one user on a CPU core because you're not worried about that user getting the full desktop experience, opening up Chrome and opening up a million tabs. That's really what I'm afraid of, right? I'm afraid of
Okay.
people doing other things. You know, if you give somebody a full desktop, they have free reign to use everything on that desktop. But if you give somebody a remote app, they can only use that remote app, which helps me more confidently size something much smaller and know that the customer still will have a good experience.
Okay.
You
Make
go
sense?
over so you built this, like you said, for 20 people, one session host. Would it be good to try and do 2 that could scale on and off based on usage? Or is it really like, well, if these 20 people are working 8 to 5, it doesn't matter. We're just going to leave it.
Yeah.
running.
So for a 20 user environment, I'd probably use like an E20 ASV4. That's a 20 core, 160 gig RAM machine, right? You know, you can do one machine and leave it on 24/7, or you can do 2 smaller machines and have one on all the time and deal with auto scaling. Now, technically, you'll save more money with 2 machines because I have an opportunity to size down one of the machines. But again, it depends on whether your customer is going to be okay with either automatically being logged off or that type of policy. All right, so that I think supersedes cost savings, right? If you have a customer that absolutely won't deal with, you know, the concept of logging them off every day, then just reserve a machine.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Which kind of, you know, so how do I select these VM sizes, right? So a lot of people ask me, well, why am I going off the bat with like a really large VM like this versus multiple smaller VMs? Like I could, like, basically the cost of one D16 ASV4 is the same cost as 4 D4 ASV4s, right? So why am I picking a larger size? And I think this is a good thing to kind of think about, right? So if I only have one person per CPU core and I have multiple, like let's say 4 of these 4-core machines, right? I have 16 people. I can either do one 16-core machine or 4 4-core machines. Why would I pick the 16-core machine? Well, I think for 2 reasons. One reason is the more machines you have, the more C drives you need, right? The C drives cost money, right? So each 128 gig standard SSD is about $8 a month. And now you have 4 of them as opposed to just one of them. So that's, from a cost saving standpoint, having more disks on reservation is not good, right? Just having more disks, you're paying for more of them. I actually had a client with about 200 something pools, and we were able to save about $3,000 or $4,000 just because we went with larger machines and changed nothing else because of the amount of disks that they were saving by not having those machines. All right, so that's number one. Number two is something that, you know, you have to think about how people use their environments, right? If you have 4 people per 4-core machine, what are the chances of 4 people doing something in their environment that spikes the CPU up 100%? So if you have 4 people on a 4-core machine, and all you have to do is just all open up Outlook or all open up a Chrome browser at the same time for that CPU to spike up to 100%. Now, you're going to hit that ceiling really, really fast because you only have a 4-core machine, right? If you go to Best Buy and buy any computer, I guarantee you have more than 4 cores for even the $300 computer for one user. So why would you put 4 people on a 4-core machine with the ability to spike up to 100% very easily, because all they have to do is just do something on that machine to hit the 100% of the 4-core machine. Now, if you have a 16-core machine, what are the chances of 16 people doing something at the same exact time that spikes the CPU up to hit 100%? Very, very low, right? So if I have 16 people on a machine, maybe 4 or 5 of them will do something at the same time that spikes my CPU up to 100%. But in a 16-core machine, I have 16 full cores to use. My ceiling is really, really high. I'm not going to hit that anytime soon, right? So if you want your customer to have a better experience, cost aside, having them on fewer but larger machines is better than having them on more and smaller machines. Does that make sense?
Makes total sense. Thank you.
Yeah. So that's very important, because I see people doing it all the time. Or, hey, I'd rather have the redundancy, right? Because I have more machines, and if something happens to a machine, then at least not all my users kicked out. Yes, that's true. But you gotta also think about the performance. So typically, you might want to balance the two, right? So maybe pick an 8-core machine instead of a 4, or instead of a 16, pick an 8-core machine. It's actually like a third reason why you would do a machine that's larger. A machine that is larger in Azure has something called like every VM node that you rent from Microsoft, as long as it's an 8-core machine and above, they have like NVMe cache that's local to the VM node itself. So essentially, if you think about what's really happening, if you spin up a VM and attach like a 120 gig drive, your VM is running on like a rack in one part of the data center, and then you have another part of the data center where that iSCSI disk is basically being attached over the network, right, to that disk, to that VM running. So you have a C drive being attached from a different SAN that's powering your VM. But if you have an 8-core machine and above, there's enough local cache NVMe disk that is solid state, that's local in the node itself, that you can actually use to store your C drive. Which means you don't have to pay for a C drive, and you're not paying for the latency of that drive traveling through iSCSI to that machine being directly attached. So that's called an ephemeral OS disk. An ephemeral OS disk is like really, really fast and costs nothing, because you're basically already renting that machine to run, so that cache is available for you to use in any way. So we're able to kind of use that towards our advantage and really optimize. So I keep talking about optimization, and you can see like I'm talking about these very like deep things that we're using to optimize and lower your cost while providing better performance, right? And if you're going to be successful in Azure, you have to think that way. And we can't keep thinking like on-prem, and like when you deal with on-prem, you think about disks. You really only think about how many drives are in a RAID array, what type of RAID array it is, and whether or not it has a write-back cache battery over 4 gigs or something, right? That's really all we care about on-prem, and you never have to think about IOPS. But in Azure, the only way to think about this is IOPS and where you can save money. So and it certainly takes a lot of practice to start thinking that way, but that's how you need to start thinking about things. So yeah, so I kind of went through 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then 5 we have something called auto heal broken hosts. So sometimes that agent I was talking about, this guy up here, will report back to the WVD broker that the system is unhealthy, right? It can report one of these statuses. It could be unavailable, it could be needing assistance, FS logic is not healthy, whatever the case may be. And if that happens, whether you have somebody in the session host or not, nobody new is going to be able to get into the session host, right? This is not a WVD specific issue. If you're used to running Citrix environments, the same thing happens in Citrix. But what Nerdy has done is actually, if we notice one of these statuses, brokers reporting one of these statuses, we can attempt to reboot the machine to kind of bring it back to a healthy state, or completely remove the machine and recreate it from scratch. All right, so now we're kind of automating that task, so you don't have to kind of look at it and watch it. Not that it happens all the time, but when it does, you know, you've already basically selected how to deal with it when that scenario happens. So all you got to do is specify all the stuff, press save, and pretty much, you know, creates the environment for you. Now let's go back to your desktop image and see that's done. Yep. Good, Danny?
No, I was going to say, can you have multiple scenarios embedded in? So for instance, like you said, if the FX logic is corrupted, do this. If this happens, do that.
No, because usually what fixes it, usually the issue is the agent itself, not really like
Okay.
the host or anything to deal with do with the host. The agent needs to just report. Sometimes it reports one of those statuses if the agent needs updating and it gets stuck in updating and just throws out weird errors.
All
But
right.
usually
Gotcha.
a
Thanks.
reboot of that fixes it, or you can reimage the machine. So if I go back to the desktop image, this is the tag demo image that I've basically imported into Nerdio. So if I want to go and edit the image, I just click on power on. Right, and now Nerdio is going to turn on that machine. And again, it's a brand new, brand spanking new, plain old Windows 10 machine with Pro Plus installed on it. This is where you're going to go into the machine, right? RDP into it. So maybe I have a way to get into this network. RDP into it, update the software, install your Lacert, install QuickBooks, whatever the customer needs. And in a minute, you'll see this button turn into power off instead of image. So right now the machine is on. I can basically RDP into it and make any application updates I want. So let's say I've done everything I wanted to do. I now click power off as image, press OK. Now Nerdio is going to go set that image and set it up, sysprep that image for you. So sysprep basically means strip out all the stuff that causes imaging not to work and generalize the image to prep it for deployment. Right. So this takes about 10 to 15 minutes. And when that is complete, based on the auto scaling, every time it creates a new session host, it creates it off that same image. Right. So imagine every single night, if you have auto scaling turned on and off, or turned on, you can have a customer have their Windows 10 boxes re-imaged every single morning, or every single morning at 3 a.m. in the morning. So when they log in at 7 in the morning, they're essentially logging into brand new computers that wasn't there yesterday. Everything all based off your golden image. So think about how many less tickets you'll have if everybody basically is signing into a new computer every single day, right? So we see a lot of tickets once we put in a new computer after a couple of months. Things, the customer's using the computer, things slow down, they install stuff on it. And after 2 or 3 years, that machine becomes a problematic machine, right? You're going to want to kind of resell them a new machine because you don't really want to invest the time in reimaging that machine because it's already 3 years old and blah, blah, blah. You know how the beat goes. But here, we're basically reimaging machines every single morning. And so every single day they come in, they get the same desktop experience, same files, same OST files, same OneDrive, all that's still synced. But the underlying Windows 10 operating system is all brand new, right? So you can set that here where you can go to host and go to resize reimage. And let's say I want to reimage using the tag demo image. And maybe I have 5 session hosts in that machine. I want to batch them all reimage at the same time. I want to reimage it during the day. And I want to do it at 3 a.m. in the morning every single day. And you press go, and that schedule is set up to automatically reimage every day. And this is going to help you solve a lot of your, tickets, right? Because nobody has any old machines anymore.
Tony, that's assuming that there's nothing unique about the VDI. It's more just a generic machine that doesn't have any special software. I want to say like one version, one user would have Acrobat Pro, the other would have standard, and then others don't have it at all. You'd have to create 3 different, in essence,
images
for each of those, right?
So not exactly. So but you're thinking the right way, right? Yes. So to answer your question, technically is no, but you're thinking the right way. So something in FS Logics is called app masking. So you can actually go to this image. Let's say you have a client with 5 different departments, right? And you want to make one golden image for that 5 different departments that have different applications. You can actually install all the applications that everybody in that organization will ever need. But when you start off your image, it'll actually hide it from that end user that isn't in the right department. So let's say you have a medical client, right? You have the medical billers that have the billing software, the Medicare billing software, and then you have clients that using Epic EMR, right? Whatever the EMR is. But you don't want the clinical people seeing the accounting stuff. You don't want the accounting stuff seeing the clinical stuff. But you install everything on the same image. So in FS Logics, you can actually set up by different security groups, right? So AD security groups, depending on what group they're in, when they log in, just like FS Logics brings their profile in, FS Logics can also hide applications from being seen in the start menu, in the C drive, and in the desktop. So they're using the same image, but they're actually opening up only what they can see. If that makes sense. So it's hiding it from them. So I'll give you an example.
Well, sometimes that would work with licensed software. You can't just load like Acrobat on everything because they've only got a finite number of licenses though, right?
Right. So Acrobat licenses are actually stored in the user profile. So the user profile, because that profile traverses wherever they log on, that profile, that activation license follows the user. So we have like a huge school system with 50,000 students. They have teachers with one type of Adobe licenses, and they have students with a different type of Adobe license. We use the same image, and the license activation travels with the user profile.
Perfect. That's going to be great then. Thanks.
So now, unless you're using the perpetual version, right, non-Adobe Cloud version, I don't know, for that. So let me show you how that works. So it's called FSLogic's app masking. It's a tool it's actually very easy to use. Crap, I should have opened it in administrator mode. Now you do this as the admin and you do it on the image. You don't do it on the session host itself. But let's say I wanted to, let me just delete this to start over. Let's say I want to hide QuickBooks from people that I know won't use it. So you can go and create a new rule. The rule is called hide QuickBooks. And then it's going to go and allow me to choose from a application that's already installed on the computer. So I'll find QuickBooks 2020. I press scan. It's going to go look at all my registry and com files for everything that's mentioning anything with QuickBooks. Press OK. Here's all they are. I can basically use this to basically assign, is this assigned to everyone? No. Is it assigned to specific security groups? Yes. But I could also check this box and it'll mimic this rule applying to my username. If I check this box, you can see the QuickBooks just went away. I go to my start menu, I go to my C drive, I can try to look for it. In my registry, it just doesn't exist anymore, right? But then I can restore it by having it come right back. So that's just how it's going to work across multiple applications based on a security group, if you want to use one image for everything. So one image is good because you only have to patch and maintain one image as opposed to an image for every department. But again, it depends on how large or complex your customer environment is and which way you'd rather do it. But
hey, Tony, we just hit the hour.
Yeah, so I think we're done here, but basically this gives you an idea on how to manage these host pools. The rest of this other stuff with servers, that's pretty straightforward, so we can kind of go over that later. But so we went through sort of setting up a new environment and then jumping right into creating your images and talking about host pools and auto scaling. Okay, guys. So we'll catch you Thursday for the next one. And remember, there's free Nerdio licensing if you sign up and deploy by June 30th. Let me know if you need the link to sign up for that for 6 months.
Thank you, Tony.
Okay.
Thanks,
Take care,
Tony.
guys. Okay. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Tony, for